a story that we are tracking that is, by the way, of India's rice export. Now, India had banned export of rice to ensure that there is adequate supply of rice within the country. Prices of rice continue to be stable, but it's making an exception, and it's making an exception for those countries perhaps with which it has special ties.
It's a two-way thing. 150,000 tons of rice is stuck at the ports, and it's been stuck for 2 months. So, exporters who have paid duty, export duty, which is 20%, by the 20th of July, are allowed to export it to where this rice was to go, specifically to 3 countries, Bhutan, Mauritius, and 50,000 tons of that, of course, is going to Singapore, with whom India has. All of these countries we have special ties. So, it is a part, and it's non-basmati.
Okay.
Non-basmati.
Non-basmati,
basmati
absolutely.
was allowed.
Right.
So, the special ties is of course there, and Singapore was a major importer. Their demand was met mostly by what they got from India. So, it's the rice that was stuck. It was not that this rice was being sold in the Indian markets. It was stuck at the ports, and that's being offloaded to these countries.
So, Shweta, there's a total of about 1.43 lakh tons, and this is a special case exception that the government of India has made. So, you rightly said that up until 20th of July, the challenge that India was facing was high inflation, and that high inflation coming of course through high demand and a shortage in supply. So, to curb that shortage of supply by way of exports, the government decided to first put a ban on export of non-basmati rice. Thereon, earlier this month, we also saw that even the basmati rice exports had been halted. Now, the government has opened this as a special case, the export of non-basmati white rice only as a special case, because there is a food security challenge brewing in these 3 countries. And these 3 countries, like Amit had mentioned, are Bhutan, our neighbor, one of the few neighbors that we have a good relationship with, and we want to continue sort of, fostering that good relationship, given its proximity both to China and India. So, there is Bhutan, then there is Singapore, and which is the 3rd country you mentioned, and Mauritius, of course. So, Mauritius, well, opaque, non-opaque structures notwithstanding, Mauritius is the 3rd country that India has opened its supply to. And of course, I think in varied measures, 79,000 tons, 14,000 tons and 50,000 tons respectively to the 3 countries. And just as a special case, as an exception, these exports have now been permitted, and these exports have opened up because there is a food security challenge that these friendly to India countries are facing right now.
Right.
And then, of course, there's been an LPG price reduction, and inflation pressures will partly be taken up, with that price cut. So, I think India is a little more malleable right now to send some rice out.
Some of the rice out to other countries. Remember, India is the 2nd largest exporter of rice in the world. So, after that export ban kicked in, we saw a lot of Indians, NRIs, holding up rice. There were visuals, pictures, and bites of many of these Indians living abroad who were fearing that there's going to be an acute rice shortage after India halted the export. But that hasn't really happened so far. We don't know
I don't
of
have the numbers, Shweta, but there was tremendous pressure on India from multiple quarters across the world to actually lift that ban. And even for the laptop import ban, there was pressure from the US for India to lift it.
Absolutely.
So, I think India is trying hard right now to take a very tough stand in the interest of its own domestic challenges in a year to a run-up to the national elections. I think India is taking a few very, very tough decisions right now, and trying as far as possible to stick by those decisions and making exceptions in very, very few instances. So, let's
These
see
are
how
the
it pans
exceptions
out.
to begin with.
No, I think another exception that came in the news recently, but then we couldn't sort of verify that independently. In fact, I had myself asked Industry Minister Piyush Goyal when I had met him at a social function a few days back about Tesla's entry plans in India. And just like all ministers in the ruling party right now, BJP, evade such questions. Even he did fairly successfully, and he said, I will not be able to give you an exclusive soundbite on this, etc. Right. But what we read later on was that India could make an exception for Tesla and may not subject Tesla to the same custom duties, excise duties, import duties as the rest of the automakers. So, I think India is setting some stringent rules across the board, whether it is making in India, manufacturing in India, export bans, import bans, cutting of essential items prices. We've seen that with onions, we've seen that with tomatoes, we've seen that across the board, in fact, the last 2-3 months, right? Pulses, etc. So last year we saw it with wheat. So,
Right.
so you know, we are trying to make these very, very tough, stringent policies in our national interest,
right.
and making some very few calculated exceptions.
If I may say, and in my very limited career, this is the most protectionist we've ever been. I mean, I'm sure you can weigh in more of the last 20 years of your career, Karthik. If you've ever been this protectionist when it comes to export ban, import curbs, etc., all of that, of course, pointing to perhaps a government that is sticking its neck out and ensuring that people and the country stand to benefit over perhaps trade agreements that we have signed, over, you know, pressures from foreign governments.
So, Shweta, how I see it, I agree. I mean, you know, there is protectionism, and India right now is perhaps, you know, among the very few globalized large economies which are implementing such protectionism. But we've got to see a clear departure from where we were pre-1991 when India opened up and liberalized its economy to where we are 32 years later in 2023. Back in 1991, corruption was high.
Right.
We did not have the expertise, the skilled manpower, the investments, the financial muscle to really be able to make our own you know, products and services and cater to our own demand. So we had a balance of payment crisis, and there was no other option then for India but to open up its economy, because you needed that foreign investment coming into the country. You needed international brands, international products making their way into India. 32 years later, I think we have reached a level where we can be a little more assured about our own capabilities of building products that we need, that products that we consume, and have a little more say in the global sort of, you know, geo-economic, geopolitical landscape, where we are able to take a decision in our national interest and defend it. And
so priorities have changed.
I think
but it's
capabilities
taken some,
have
and
changed.
capabilities have changed. It's taken some years to arrive at where we
because
are
whatever
at the
was done in
moment.
1991 was also in the best interest of
Absolutely.
India's growth, India's economic independence.
The
What is being
challenges
done
were
right
different,
now- challenges were different, environment
absolutely.
was different. What is being done right now is also seemingly in the best national interest
Absolutely.
possible. So if we can actually have manufacturing set up in India, we can have companies coming, making in India, and really China plus one becoming a China plus India, and over time India minus China, I think we are paving a very, very solid fundamental road towards our own growth.